I did not quit on you. Apparently the internet had what I like to call a brain fart. But hey, it happened during the commercial break. It happened while the hearing was on break. We are back. Still probably have a couple minutes before the hearing reconvenes. I have fresh coffee. Getting ready to hear witness testimony. I was riveted by what we heard. How the meetings went down with Sidney Powell, the dude from Overstock.com, Cifaloni talking about the dude from Overstock.com, not knowing who he, like, that was the first thing I asked. Who are you? Oh, I have totally been amused by the testimony. I'm sorry, Mandy. It might, for YouTube, it was down for a little bit. My internet went down for a little bit. When I came back from the restroom, the stream was down. I don't know how long it had been down, but it might have started a completely new stream on YouTube. That's a thing that happens. Clearly you're on YouTube, so I don't have to go check and make sure that it's... Sometimes I have to make sure that it's actually streaming to YouTube. It also fucks up my monetization. Like if it starts a new stream, it doesn't have it doesn't have like ads and shit on it anymore. So I don't get my 14 cents from YouTube. Boo. I want my 14 cents from YouTube. Cause I have never gotten a paycheck from YouTube. I got money from Twitch. Never got money from YouTube because you have to reach $100 before it'll let you cash out. I mean, Twitch is the same way, but like Twitch works a lot differently. But like, I've nowhere near hit the 100. I'm like almost to 70 now. Woohoo! One of these days I might get my YouTube money. So like 14 cents a day. You too can feed this East Tennessee Appalachian boy. Give this man his 14 cents. Help feed a freakin'. Help feed a freakin'.
Hey, Justin, are you trolling?
Always, always, always be trolling. ABT, always be trolling. I'm gonna pull the Glenn Ross on you. Always be trolling. Are you talking to me? Do you want a microphone? Did you have headphones? Yeah, you got your headphones. Yeah, you're good. Did you say you want me to pack a bowl for you? Oh, you want a bong? Okay. Understandable. What matters is functionality, not the looks, right? It was real high, just need to be trimmed down. We're gonna go back to the January 6th hearings now, because goddamn, this has been interesting.
And Bill Barr, who were saying the election is decided. The committee turns its focus now to extremist organizations. This action.
This is where we're going to see the rioters testify.
Tweet by then President Donald Trump on December 19th. James, we'll hear from a former spokesman for the Oath Keepers. We'll also hear from someone, we believe, who came to the Capitol that day.
Yes, and this is important, and it gets at something. Talking about the strategy here, Liz Cheney said,
"Look at these motherfuckers!
Don't let the people around Trump."
Wait a minute, isn't that eye patch guy
by Sidney Powell?
Well, where's his eye patch? He has both his eyes. What
Donald Trump's?
Or am I thinking of somebody else? That's not eye patch guy.
His own words and his actions had consequences of summoning
Ben Tatenhove.
Summoning.
I'm pretty sure that's eye patch guy
to come to the Capitol.
Did he just wear it for aesthetics and he didn't actually have an eye missing?
Jason
what the fuck?
Van Tatenhove is a former spokesman for the Oath Keepers. We are also expecting to hear from Stephen Ayers. He is a Capitol riot defendant. The committee has been tight-lipped, though, about who their witnesses would be, James. They cited...
Okay, he could possibly have a glass eye.
Witness tampering, which Liz Cheney brought up at the end of their last hearing.
Yeah, and so this is, this world, these guys, the January 6th defendant could get more leniency in a sentence for cooperating with the committee, but, for the former Oath Keepers spokesman, he's alienating a whole world that he's been a part of for more than a decade. So testifying is...
I have no clue
what happened. There are a lot of people that he has been around who obviously have a very strong incentive for him not to testify. And it's worth mentioning, Libby, here that the Oath Keepers is led by Stuart Rhodes, who has been charged with
I have no idea what's going on
by the Justice Department in their separate investigation into January 6th. And this idea that there was actively an effort by these people who came on January 6th to overthrow the United States government. And I expect that the former spokesman for this group will put some meat on the bones of those allegations.
Stephen Ayers entered the Capitol on the day of the riot.
It is indeed eye patch guy.
To go there before that. That is who you see there to the left of your screen, one of the witnesses. And then, as James has been saying, we see the former spokesperson for the Oath Keepers. The goal of today's committee hearing is to show that link between the White House, between President Trump's call and the response. But James, there is the question that Rhonda laid out for us at the very beginning of other connective thread. Are there other ways besides a tweet and a response that this committee will try to demonstrate to show connections?
Yes, there was this war room that was set up at the Willard Hotel that Michael Flynn was a part of. We heard Cassidy Hutchinson say that Mark Meadows got on a call with people who were in this war room. There's been reporting
this is
that
eye patch guy from the Oath Keepers that we're getting ready to hear from.
Envoys or representatives who at one point popped in, and were seen in this Willard
So just so you know,
they're going to be.
He's not going to be in the graphic, but this guy as well. I would love to piss in his open eye hole.
Emissaries and go-betweens.
Just like I like to piss in Dan Crenshaw's open eye hole.
The leader of the Oath Keepers was asking for contact information for senior Trump people. So there's a lot of questions about who was talking to who, when, and what they were saying. But there certainly was sort of a web of contact and communication, not just between and within the various extremist groups, but also between the.
No, he looks to have two functioning eyes.
And people
was the eye patch just a look? Did he have some kind of surgery maybe at one point in time?
Was Trump? Trump in the past has been quite careful.
Also,
about
like
this kind of thing,
the ink
where
looks a
he's
little
not
new.
having direct conversations, but perhaps he was so desperate in the run-up to January 6th that he was directly.
I'm partial to early AC/DC before they kind of got like still in their sound.
Be apprised of.
I really like the Bon Scott years
on January 6th.
But there are a few of those
Stephen
like
Ayers,
catchy pop tunes.
Riot
Hell
defendant.
yeah, Bon Scott.
The other witness, Jason Van Tatenhove, is a former spokesperson.
There are a few of the poppy hits from a little later, from the next three albums from old what's his name, Brian Johnson's that hit.
January 6th committee. James, we heard some of Pat Cipollone's testimony let's
And
talk.
also, it takes me back to my childhood because they were fucking
forthcoming
huge.
witness, and some of the
89,
clips
90
that we saw, it seemed like he didn't want to violate
I feel
executive
like they were.
privilege,
I feel like they were.
He was being a little
they
cagey
did like a
in
movie
some of his
theme
answers,
or something. in
but he
like
clearly
90.
had no problem at all.
Like the movie
unloading
was
when
a
it came
bomb,
to
but like
Sidney
the
Powell and
song
that,
was a hit. and
critical
shit.
December 18th, 2020 meeting, and we
Something like
heard
that.
from
They put him back on the map.
speakers, the chair and the vice chair, that we're going to hear a lot more of what Pat Cipollone had to say at a hearing that we expect will be next week.
I mean, I can listen to him up until, you know, like 2000-ish.
What we've seen in this
I like
series
that
of
one,
summer
like,
hearings.
'cause I was born
And so
with a stiff.
It doesn't
stiff
appear
upper
that Cipollone has
I fucking like
in
that
any
song.
way that would contradict what we heard in the bombshell testimony.
Oh, that's not him. I'm getting like this isn't.
The
Van
testimony
Tatenhove?
from Pat Cipollone was sought after.
This is a different
by
guy.
Liz
I'm getting
Cheney
him confused.
Publicly, in fact, even in front of all of us, James. And it does seem like it's going to two things. One, this date we're looking at, this December 18th, December 19th timeframe, and two, January 6th itself, and as things unfolded that day.
I also don't
And
know.
we
Like,
have not
I have
heard
like a
any of the
face
clips of
blindness
Cipollone
and shit.
on
Like,
January
I
6th.
can't tell
Everything
people
we've heard
apart.
so far this afternoon has
Ever.
been in the lead up to, we heard him saying that he did tell Trump that
not a
he
racist
lost. We heard
thing.
him
It's
saying that,
white people as well,
Meadows told
clearly.
him that that they were going to get Trump to
Because
move
apparently
on
that's
from
not
this.
eye patch guy.
But we haven't heard anything from that day as it relates to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, which is that Cipollone told her that they had to stop Trump.
Guys,
from
I think
going
this is going to be kind of
Capitol,
wild.
because if they did,
This whole
in
thing,
Hutchinson's
this
telling,
whole
Cipollone
thing.
said they'd be charged with every crime imaginable for making that movement.
No, I actually think if
Trump
you
moving the
are
motorcade.
a
And Cipollone,
a different
ran,
race than me, that makes you more
into
distinctive.
the,
I'm more likely to
West Wing
recognize
to
you in
talk
a
to
crowd
Donald
of people.
Trump, as the mob was there in the Capitol to try to get him to weigh in.
White
So we've
people
heard
are
various
just like
outside
this. They're
testimony.
just all
I-
jars of
it
mayo.
was
They all
striking
look
to see some
fucking
of the
alike.
texts in this
Every
first
every
segment of
single
this
white
afternoon's
person
hearings.
just
we saw a
like
new text from
mayo,
Cassidy
mayo,
Hutchinson
mayo.
to Tony Ornato.
I've seen a million
Secret
people that look
Service,
like Mr.
along with
Aries
who was
or
working
Ayers
as
or
Deputy
whatever
White
the
House
fuck
Chief of
his
Staff,
name
where
is there.
she was saying in the text that there were people drinking around the Oval Office as this crazy meeting was unfolding on December 18th.
That sounds about right. People
Will
were
we see more
drinking as
Cassidy
a crazy
Hutchinson's
meeting was
texts?
going on in the Oval Office.
We hear more corroboration of her story about those days leading up to January 6th. And again, we also continue to see people who are pleading the fifth.
I guess they had to get everybody
Michael
else
Flynn
seated
was seen
before they'll
once
bring
again
back in the
saying that
representatives.
He wasn't going to answer any questions about this
Like a
particular
security
meeting
measure or some
because
shit.
He wants to invoke his constitutional right against self-incrimination.
James, we're seeing some members of Congress in the audience. The cameras were flashing to them earlier. We just continue to see them
white
come
people.
and witness this hearing and attend in person. We've also seen officers
so funny.
who were there
Us white
at the
people.
Capitol on the day of the attack come and repeatedly sit here to witness these hearings. Really jarring to see these exchanges from the attackers of the Capitol talking about.
And that's the wild thing is that
talk about coming to the Capitol and
the right wingers who say
essentially
that everybody
attacking
else
the
can't take a
police, going
joke
there
if you joke about
regardless of
white
any
people,
police
man,
effort.
they get upset.
And talk about the white supremacy
You
of
joke
this. Talk
you joke about America.
attacking
They're like, you don't joke
members of
about my
Congress.
country
And some of
now.
the people in this
It's the
room
greatest
were
country on
directly
earth.
under threat or
You don't
even
joke
defending
about my fucking country. My granddaddy died for this country.
Has been a spot where we've seen lots of current and former Capitol police officers.
Oh, I'm
during all
sorry.
these
Do you
hearings.
need a safe
We
space
saw
while
Sheila Jackson
I
Lee,
piss on the
the
flag?
Democrat from Texas. This is very personal. This is an attack on their workplace.
And they'll be the same people that'll tell you not to trust the government.
People calling for your
It's the
execution. storming your
craziest
workplace,
fucking thing.
breach through your security. It's incredibly visceral, and there is a sense that the window is closing to get to the bottom of this. The committee needs to put out its report before the end of the year. Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill all believe that Republicans are going to win control of the House and dissolve this committee. And so there's this.
I don't know why you motherfuckers believe that. Don't believe that.
To prove conclusively these links and to establish.
I think
there
I
was
can.
this
I think I
conspiracy
can.
That Donald Trump knew what was happening.
Don't just give up. Yeah, like, even I've been saying
For
it.
backup. That was what Stephanie Murphy said.
If ever the Democrats were dealt a hand that's going to fall in their favor,
it is incredibly personal.
It seems to be the 2022 election that they might actually stumble in
but
to retaining control. But like, I don't know what happens if that happens.
And to say it's old news or to say that this is a partisan exercise, but privately they're aghast at what Cassidy Hutchinson said about Trump knowing that a lot of people in the crowd were armed when he urged them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell, like they won't have a country anymore if they don't. These revelations are breaking through, and a lot of Republican donors are
try to run, try to hide,
and thinking Donald Trump cannot be the GOP nominee in 2024 because it'll be a disaster.
Listen to the fucking Doors,
and it's reminding a lot of people of why they were so eager to turn the page. 71 million people voted for Joe Biden in 2020, in part because of this kind of behavior. Although what happened on January 6th obviously transpired after the election was over.
Yeah, James, let's remind our audience.
Anytime I would take a hallucinogen,
the witnesses at that
I'd break out the celebration of the Lizard King.
He's a former Oath Keeper spokesperson.
It's on one of the Doors live albums. Like 13 minutes long.
That's who will be speaking before this committee publicly.
Got a bell or their triangle. I don't know what the fuck they're playing in the background.
Employee who we heard from, James, whose voice was disguised so that person would not be recognized.
I had to hear John Morrison. In what way, Mandy? In what way?
Was interpreting Donald Trump's tweets.
I mean, like, he would be an old fucking man if he was still alive.
Saying to the audience.
It was pretty striking because it was directly at odds with the message that Twitter itself has espoused over the last year and a half to defend itself.
Yeah, the Doors were not.
They didn't know what was going on, and they didn't think he was.
The Doors are not like this vanguard of music. And like,
they obviously.
Here's the thing: is like the psychedelic sound wasn't even like the Doors get credit for it, and it was actually the 13th floor elevators.
They saw that Trump was
out of Austin that came up with what you would call the psychedelic sound
site, but in related sites where traffic was being driven. They saw the door like conversation. So it was essentially like
John Morrison wasn't some genius
poet. Who was in a position to know was watching this car crash that was about to happen in the run
and the Doors were barely serviceable as a
there being three.
Did I say John the wrestler John Morrison?
It's Donald Trump pressure,
who is now Johnny
violent extremist
elite
groups. And then on the outside it's the large angry crowd, and that crowd was summoned because of what was happening on Twitter.
Jim Morrison wasn't a brilliant poet.
Returning to the dais.
The band was barely serviceable.
Leading the way. We're also hearing a lot from.
I'm sorry if I'm hurting anybody. Listen to the Doors. Your favorite band sucks.
Caucus room. This is the.
And it will tell you all. It'll tell you all about it.
Series.
Well, my favorite podcast. Your favorite band sucks.
Jason Van Tentenhove and
my favorite episodes is when they tear my favorite bands apart, like Tool. They totally have an episode about Tool. They tear Tool apart using Tool's own words. All right, now we're back to the January 6th hearing.
Committee will be in order. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman,
listen to their episode about Nickelback, Mandy. It's fantastic.
Washington to form the angry crowd that would be transformed on January the 6th into a violent mob. Dr. Donnell Harvin, who was the Chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for D.C., told the committee how his team saw Trump's December 19th tweet unite violent groups across the spectrum on the far right.
We got derogatory information from OSINT suggesting that some very, very violent individuals were organizing to come to D.C. And not only were they organizing to come to D.C., but they were these groups, these non-aligned groups were aligning. And so all the red flags went up at that point. You know, when you have armed militia.
If non-aligned groups align, that's a red flag.
White supremacy groups collaborating with conspiracy theory groups online, all toward the common goal, you start seeing what we call in terrorism a blended ideology, and that's a very, very bad sign. Then when they were clearly across, not just across one platform, but across multiple platforms of these groups coordinating, not just like chatting, hey, how's it going? What's the weather like where you're at? But like, what are you bringing? What are you wearing? Where do we meet up? Do you
The
have
Proud Boys asking the Oath Keepers, what are you wearing?
That's like pre-operational intelligence, right? And that is something that's clearly alarming.
You live in sexual anarchy?
The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers are two key groups that responded immediately to President Trump's call. The Proud Boys are a far-right street-fighting group that glorifies violence and white supremacy. The Oath Keepers are extremists who promote a wide range of conspiracy theories and sought to act as a private paramilitary force for Donald Trump. The Department of Justice has charged leaders of both groups with seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States.
Apparently in a classic rock mood today.
Trump's December 19th tweet motivated these two extremist groups, which have historically not worked together to coordinate their activities. December 19th at 10:22 a.m., just hours after President Trump's tweet, Kelly Meggs, the head of the Florida Oath Keepers, declared an alliance among the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and the Florida Three Percenters, another militia group. He wrote, "We have decided to work together and shut this shit down." Phone records obtained by the Select Committee show that later that
Raskin
afternoon,
said
Mr. Meggs
shit.
called Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, and they spoke for several minutes. The very next day, the Proud Boys got to work. The Proud Boys launched an encrypted chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense. The committee obtained hundreds of these messages, which show strategic and tactical planning about January the 6th, including maps of Washington, D.C. that pinpoint the location of police. In the weeks leading up to the attack, leaders in both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers worked with Trump allies. One such ally was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Trump's former national security advisor and one of the participants in the unhinged meeting at the White House on December 18th. He also had connections to the Oath Keepers. This photo from December 12th shows Flynn and Patrick Byrne, another Trump ally who was present at that December 18th meeting, guarded by indicted Oath Keeper Roberto Minuta. Another view of this scene shows Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes in the picture as well.
Okay, yeah, that is Eye Patch Guy.
With ties to this network of extremist groups was Roger Stone, a political consultant and
I
longtime
got my assholes mixed up. You forgive me, all assholes look alike.
Stone in the weeks between the election on November 3rd and January 6th. In the same time frame, Stone communicated with both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers regularly. The committee
of course Roger Stone would be involved in all of this.
From a group
we
chat
knew this.
Friends of Stone, FOS, which included Stone, Rhodes, Tarrio, and Ali Alexander. The chat focused on various pro-Trump events in November and December of 2020, as well as January 6th. As you can see here,
I wonder if he ever got his Friends of Stone
to have
chat
people
mixed
go to their
up with
state
like a
capitals
swingers chat.
if they could not make it to Washington for the first Million MAGA March on November 14th. These friends of Roger
Stone is a different group.
Had a significant presence at multiple pro-Trump events after the election, including in Washington on December the 12th. On that day, Stuart Rhodes called for Donald Trump to invoke martial law, promising bloodshed if he did not.
He needs to know from you that you are with him, that if he does not do it now while he is commander-in-chief, we're going to have to do it ourselves later in a much more desperate, much more bloody war. Let's get it on now while he is still the commander-in-chief. Hooah!
Let's get it on.
That night, the Proud Boys engaged in violence on the streets of Washington and hurled aggressive insults at the police.
You oath breakers! Do your fucking job! Give us 1 hour! 1 hour!
Just the previous night, the co-host of InfoWars, issued an ominous warning at a rally alongside Roger Stone and Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio. Encrypted chats obtained by the Select Committee show that Kelly Meggs, the indicted leader of the Florida Oath Keepers, spoke directly with Roger Stone about security on January 5th and 6th. In fact, on January 6th, Stone was guarded by 2 Oath Keepers who have since been criminally indicted for seditious conspiracy. One of them later pleaded guilty, and according to the Department of Justice, admitted that the Oath Keepers were ready to use, quote, lethal force if necessary against anyone who tried to remove President Trump from the White House, including the National Guard. As we've seen, the Proud Boys were also part of the Friends of Stone.
I will leave Marvin
Stone's
out of
ties to the
this.
Proud
You're
Boys
right.
go back many years. He's even taken their so-called fraternity.
If he's here, he'd be like, "What's
required
going
for the first
on?
level
What's
of
go-"
initiation
sorry.
to the group.
Hi, I'm Roger Stone. I'm a Western chauvinist. I refuse to apologize for creating modern law. Thank you, Roger.
You didn't do shit. You didn't do fucking shit.
Kelly Sorrell, a lawyer who assists the
It absolutely
Oath Keepers and a
is,
volunteer
Drake.
lawyer for the Trump campaign, explained to the committee how Roger Stone and other figures brought extremists of different stripes and views together.
You mentioned that Mr. Stone wanted to start the Stop the Steal series of rallies. Who did you consider the leader of?
I like the background she picked.
Like, from what you just said, it was Mr. Stone, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Ali Alexander. Is that correct?
Those are the ones that became like the center point for everything.
We'll learn more from Ms. Murphy about these individuals and their involvement in the days leading up to the violent attack on January 6th. We'll also hear how they were allowed to speak at a rally for President Trump the night before January 6th, even though organizers had expressed serious concerns about their violent and extremist rhetoric directly to Mark Meadows. And you'll hear testimony from White House aides who were with the president as he watched the crowd from the Oval Office and will testify about how excited he was for the following day. Let me note now that our investigation continues on these critical issues. We have only shown a small fraction of what we have found. I look forward to the public release of more of our findings later, Mr. Chairman, and I now yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy.
During our most recent hearing, the committee showed some evidence of what President Trump, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and other White House officials knew about the potential for violence on January 6th. And despite this information, they made no effort to cancel the rally, halt the march to the Capitol, or even to lower the temperature among President Trump's supporters. Katrina Pearson, one of the organizers of January 6th rally and a former campaign spokeswoman for President Trump, grew increasingly apprehensive after learning that multiple activists had been proposed as speakers for the January 6th rally. These included some of the people we discussed earlier in this hearing. Roger Stone, a longtime outside advisor to President Trump. Alex Jones, the founder of the conspiracy theory website InfoWars. And Ali Alexander, an activist known for his violent political rhetoric. On December 30th, Ms. Pearson exchanged.
Can we lock up all of those men? The world would be a much better place.
Like Mr. Alexander and Mr. Jones were being suggested as speakers at the president's rally on January 6th. Ms. Pearson's explanation was POTUS, and she remarked that the president likes the crazies. The committee asked Ms. Pearson about these messages, and this is what she said.
So when you said that he likes the crazies, were you talking about President Trump?
Yes, I was talking about President Trump. He loved people who viciously defended him in public.
But consistent in terms of the support for these people, at least with what the president likes, from what you could tell.
Yes, the people that would be very, very vicious in publicly defending him.
On January 2nd, Ms. Pearson's concerns about the potential rally speakers had grown serious enough that she reached out to Mr. Meadows directly. She wrote, "Good afternoon. Would you mind giving me a call regarding this January 6th event? Things have gotten crazy and I desperately need some direction, please." According to phone records obtained by the committee, Ms. Pearson received a phone call from Mr. Meadows 8 minutes later. Here's what Ms. Pearson said about that conversation.
So what specifically did you tell him, though, about other events?
Just that there were a bunch of entities coming in. Some were very suspect, but they're going to be on other stages, some on other days. A very, very brief overview of what was actually happening and why I raised the red flags.
Oh shit!
And when you told him that people were very suspect, what did you tell him what you meant by that, or what did you convey to him about what your the problems with these
That's
folks?
why I ran a 3-minute break when I did the break when they broke.
But I did briefly go over some of the concerns.
I thought nobody would get a commercial for like the next fucking 2 hours
some
or
of the rhetoric
something.
that they were doing. I probably mentioned to him that they had already caused trouble at other capitals.
I was trying to work it out that way, RB. I'm sorry.
Previous march that they did for protesting, and I just had a concern about it.
Ms. Pearson was especially concerned about Ali Alexander and Alex Jones because in November 2020, both men and some of their supporters had entered the Georgia state capitol to protest the results of the 2020 election. Ms. Pearson believed that she mentioned this to Mark Meadows on this January 2nd call. Notably, January 2nd is the same day on which, according to Cassidy Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows warned her of that things might get real bad on January 6th. After her January 2nd call with Mr. Meadows, Katrina Pearson sent an
Hey, if you've got Amazon Prime, you get a free
wrote,
sub.
POTUS
Then you won't get any
expectations
commercials.
are to have something intimate at the ellipse.
Just saying, I'm not going to encourage anybody to spend money on me.
President's own documents.
That's why I try to
suggest
take
that
the commercial break to minimize the
decided
commercials that
to
you get
call
on
his
stream.
supporters to go to the Capitol on January 6th, but that he chose not to widely announce it until his speech on the ellipse that morning.
But if you happen to have Amazon Prime,
The
you
committee
do have
has
one free
obtained
sub.
this draft, undated tweet from the National Archives. It includes a stamp stating, "President has seen." The draft tweet reads, "I will be making a big
Bezos
speech
money.
at 10 a.m. on January 6th at the Ellipse, south of the White House. Please arrive early. Massive crowds expected. March to the Capitol after. Stop the steal." Although this tweet was never sent, rally organizers were discussing and preparing for the march to the Capitol in the days leading up to January 6th. This is a January 4th text message from a rally organizer to Mike Lindell, the MyPillow CEO. The organizer says, "This stays between us. We're having a second stage at the Supreme Court again after the ellipse. POTUS is going to have us march there / the Capitol. It cannot get out about the second stage because people will try and set up another and sabotage it. It can also not get out about the march because I will be in trouble with the National Park Service and all the agencies. But POTUS is going to just call for it, quote, unexpectedly." The end of the message indicates that the president's plan to have his followers march to the Capitol was not being broadly discussed. And then on the morning of January 5th, Ali Alexander, whose firebrand style concerned Katrina Pearson, sent a similar text to a conservative journalist. Mr. Alexander said, "Tomorrow, ellipse, then U.S. Capitol. Trump is supposed to order us to the Capitol at the end of his speech, but we will see." President Trump did follow through on his plan, using his January 6th speech to tell his supporters to march to the Capitol on January 6th. The evidence confirms that this was not a spontaneous call to action, but rather was a deliberate strategy decided upon in advance by the president. Another part of the president's strategy involves certain members of Congress who amplified his unsupported assertions that the election had been stolen. In the weeks after
let's talk about your colleagues.
the House coordinated closely with President Trump's allies in Congress to disseminate his false claims and to encourage members of the public to fight the outcome on January 6th. We know that the president met with various members to discuss January 6th well before the joint session. The president's private schedule for December 21st, 2020 shows a private meeting with Republican members of Congress. We know that Vice President Pence, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and Rudy Giuliani also attended that meeting. We obtained an email that was sent from Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama to Mark Meadows setting up that meeting.
Oh,
The
Mo
subject
Brooks
line is White House
complimented me
meeting
on my
December
fingernail polish one
21st
time.
regarding January 6th. In his email, Congressman Brooks explained that he had not asked anyone to join him in the, quote, January 6th effort. Because in his view, quote, only citizens can exert the necessary influence on senators and congressmen to join this fight against massive voter fraud and election theft. At this point, you may also recall testimony given in our earlier hearing by Acting Attorney General Richard Donahue, who said that the president asked the Department of Justice to, quote, just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
Yep.
According to White House visitor logs obtained by the committee, members of Congress present at the White House on December 21st included Congressman Brian Babin, Andy Biggs, Matt Gaetz, Louis Gohmert, Paul Gosar, Andy Harris, Jody Heiss, Jim
So
Jordan.
that's a list of chuckle fucks.
Then Congresswoman-elect Marjorie Taylor Greene was also there. We heard testimony in an early hearing that a pardon was ultimately requested by Congressman Mo Brooks and other members of Congress who attended this meeting. We've asked witnesses what happened during the December 21st meeting, and we've learned that part of the discussion centered on the role of the vice president during the counting of the electoral votes. These members of Congress were discussing what would later be known as the Eastman theory, which was being pushed by attorney John Eastman. In one of our earlier hearings, you heard in great detail that President Trump was trying to convince Vice President Pence to do something illegal. His White House counsel confirmed all of that in testimony last week.
Your view, Mr. Cipollone, upon those discussions with Mr. Philbin, with Greg Jacob, what was your assessment as to what the Vice President could or could not do at the joint session?
What was my assessment about what he could or couldn't do?
Yes, your view of the issue.
My view was that the vice president didn't have the legal authority to do anything except what he did.
They've both told us, Mr. Philbin and Mr. Jacob, that they looked very closely at the Eastman memos, the Eastman theory, and thought that it had no basis, that it was not a strategy that the president should.
No basis in reality.
Like that's consistent with your impression as well.
My impression would have been informed certainly by them.
Campaign senior advisor Jason Miller told us that Mr. Cipollone thought John Eastman's theories were nutty, something Mr. Cipollone wouldn't refute.
We received testimony from various people about this. One was Jason Miller, who was a campaign, said that what was communicated to me was that Pat Cipollone thought the idea was nutty, and at one point confronted Eastman basically with the same sentiment.
I don't have any reason to contradict what he said.
On January 4th, John Eastman went to the White House to meet with the president and vice president. Mr. Cipollone tried to participate in this meeting, but he was apparently turned away.
You didn't go to the meeting in the Oval Office where Eastman met with the president.
She said his name different like 3 different times.
Remember why you didn't personally attend?
I did walk to that meeting, and I did go into the Oval Office with the idea of attending that meeting, and then I ultimately did not attend that meeting.
Why not?
The reasons for that are privileged.
Okay. Were you asked to not attend the meeting, or did you make a personal decision not to attend the meeting?
Again, without getting into privilege.
Recall that Greg Jacob, the vice president's counsel, stated that Mr.
He's been open about everything else. I wonder why that's privilege.
If his legal theory were challenged in the Supreme Court. Mr. Cipollone had reviewed Mr. Eastman's legal theory and expressed his view repeatedly that the vice president was right. He even offered to take the blame for the
Cipollone sounds like something you're going to slice up and put on a sandwich.
I thought that the vice president did not have the authority to do what was being suggested under a proper reading of the law. I conveyed that. Okay. I think I actually told somebody that, in the vice president's, just blame me. I'm not a politician, I just said, I'm a lawyer. This is my legal opinion. But Let me tell you this. Can I say a word?
Tell you this,
Vice President?
Please.
I think the Vice President did the right thing. I think he did the courageous thing. I have a great deal of respect for Vice President Pence. I worked with him very closely. I think he understood my opinion. I think he understood my opinion afterwards as well. I think he did a great service to this country. And I think I suggested to somebody that he should be given the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his actions.
No.
Earlier this year, a federal district
Vice President,
judge
former Vice President Mike Pence did everything he could
Mr. Eastman's theory
to actually do what they wanted him to do.
Laws in their
Only
pressure
thing is,
campaign
like, just
against the Vice President.
all the same people he talked to
Also
said,
recall
no,
earlier in
you
this
can't
hearing,
do
we saw that Rudy Giuliani's team did not have actual evidence of fraud sufficient to change the
He
result
was
of the
looking
election.
for a reason to
That's
be able to do
important
it.
because as January 6th approached, the Republican members of the
Mike
House
Pence is no hero.
reason to object to the electors, and no real evidence was ever given to them. And we know that Republican members of the House received a memorandum from the chairwoman of the House Republican Caucus in the days before January 6, explaining in detail the many constitutional and legal problems with objections and describing the principal judicial rulings dismissing the claims of widespread fraud. But their plan to object to the certification of the election on January 6 went forward anyway. The next day, on January 5th, the day before the attack on the Capitol, tens of thousands of people converged on Washington. While certain close associates of President Trump privately expressed concerns about what would occur on January 6, other members of the president's inner circle spoke with great anticipation about the events to come. The committee has learned from the White House phone logs that the president spoke to Steve Bannon, his close advisor, at least twice on January.
Steve Bannon.
The first conversation they had lasted for 11 minutes. Listen to what Mr. Bannon said that day after the first call he had with the president.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. It's all converging, and now we're on, as they say, the point of attack, right? The point of attack tomorrow. I'll tell you this. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen. Okay, it's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in.
From those same phone logs, we know that the president and Mr. Bannon spoke again on the phone that evening, this time for 6 minutes. That same day, on the eve of January 6, supporters of President Trump gathered in Washington, D.C. at another rally. This rally was held at Freedom Plaza, which is located near the White House, and featured some of the speakers who Katrina Pearson and others deemed too extreme to share the stage with the president the next morning. And as this rally was underway, the president asked members of his staff to come to the Oval Office. Let's hear from the White House aides who were in the Oval Office that night.
I was in the office, in the Oval Office, and he had asked me to open the door so that he could hear. I guess there was a concert or a rap or something going on.
Did he say anything other than just open the door?
He made a comment. I don't remember specifically what he said, but there's a lot of energy.
When we walked in, the staff was kind of standing up and assembled along the wall, and the president was at the desk, and Dan Scavino was on the couch, and the president was
there is the open door,
dictating a tweet that he wanted Scavino to send out. Then the president started talking about the rally the next day. He had the door of the Oval open to the Rose Garden because you could hear the crowd already assembled outside on the ellipse, and they were playing music, and it was so loud that you could feel it shaking in the Oval. He was in a very good mood, and I say that because he had not been in a good mood for weeks leading up to it, and it seemed like he was in a fantastic mood that evening.
He asked if members of Congress would be with him tomorrow.
And what do you understand by meaning voting in his favor as opposed to physically with him or anything like that?
Yeah, and I took that to mean not voting to certify the election.
Then he did look to the staff and ask for ideas of how, if I recall, he said that we could make the rhinos do the right thing, is the way he phrased it. And no one spoke up initially because I think everyone was trying to process what that he meant by that.
The president was making notes then, talking then about we should go up to the Capitol. What's the best route to go to the Capitol?
I said he should focus on policy accomplishments. I didn't mention it.
What was his response?
He acknowledged that and said we've had a lot, something along those lines, and then he fairly quickly moved to how fired up the crowd was going to be.
And what did he say about it?
Just that they were fired up, they were angry, they feel like the election has been stolen, that the election was rigged.
Did he give any indication of how he knew that the crowd was fired up or angry?
He continued to reference being able to hear them outside.
Through the open door of the Oval Office, the president could hear the sound of the crowd and the music at the rally at the Freedom Plaza. And these are some of the things that they were saying there at the plaza, just blocks from where the president sat that evening, excited for the next day.
This is nothing less than an epic struggle for the future of this country between dark and light, between the godly and the godless, between good and evil.
We'll see who.
And we will win this fight, or America would step off into 1,000 years of darkness.
Tomorrow, trust me, the American people that are standing on the soil that we're standing on tonight, and they're going to be standing on this soil tomorrow. This is soil that we have fought for, and we will fight for in the future. The members of Congress, the members of the House of Representatives, the members of the United States Senate, those of you who are feeling weak tonight, those of you that don't.
Michael Flynn is batshit fucking crazy.
Tonight, because tomorrow we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie. We will not stand for a lie.
I want them to know that 1776 is always an option. These degenerates in the deep state are going to give us what we want, or we are going to shut this country down.
It's 1776! 1776! 1776!
Big games.
1776!
At 5:05 p.m., as the Freedom Plaza rally was underway just blocks away, President Trump tweeted, "Washington is being inundated with people who don't want to see an election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats. Our country has had enough. They won't take it anymore." To the crowds gathering in D.C., he added, "We hear you and love you from the Oval Office." The committee has learned that on January 5th, there were serious concerns at Twitter about the anticipated violence the next day. Listen to what the Twitter witness told us about their desperate efforts to get Twitter to do something.
What was your gut feeling on the night of January 5th?
I believe I sent a Slack message to someone that said something along the lines of, when people are shooting each other tomorrow, I will try and rest in the knowledge that we tried. And so I went to, I don't know that I slept that night, to be honest with you.
It could have been a lot worse.
On pins and needles. Because again,
luckily we are dealing with cowards and people that are really inept, because if they,
anticipating and attempting to raise the reality that if we made no intervention into what I saw occurring, people were going to die. And on January 5th, I realized no intervention was coming. And even as hard as I had tried to create one or implement one, there was nothing, and we were at the whims and the mercy of a violent crowd that was locked and loaded.
And just for the record, this was content that was echoing statements by the former president, but also Proud Boys.
This is the response to
known violent extremist groups.
This is the response
There were also
to capitalism.
concerns
They've been
among
hurt by
members of
capitalism,
Congress.
and
We have a
capitalist
recently released
propaganda
recording of a
has channeled
conversation
their
that
anger
took place among
to
Republican
groups that
members
have
in
no
the US
fucking
Capitol
power.
on the eve of January 6th. This is Republican
They think there's
Congresswoman
some
Debbie
deep
Lesko
state
from
that's
Arizona,
pulling the
who led some of the
strings.
unfounded objections to the election results.
There's actually
I also asked
gay
leadership to come
trans
up with a
agenda
safety plan for
that's
members.
running everything.
I'm actually very concerned about this because we have who knows how many hundreds of thousands of people coming
Specifically
here.
gay trans people.
We also have, quite honestly, Trump supporters who actually believe that we are going to overturn the election. And when that doesn't happen, most likely will not happen, they are going to go nuts.
Most likely.
That same evening, as President Trump listened to the rally from the Oval Office, he was also working on his speech to be delivered the next day. And based on documents we've received from the National Archives, including multiple drafts of the president's speech, as well as from witness testimony, we understand how that speech devolved into a call to action and a call to fight. One of the first edits President Trump made to his speech was to incorporate his 5:05 p.m. tweet, revising his speech to say, "All of us are here today, do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats. Our country has had enough. We will not take it."
Radical left.
He also added, "Together, we will stop the steal." President Trump's edits continued into the morning of January 6th. And as you can see from the president's daily diary here, the president spoke to his chief speechwriter, Stephen Miller, for over 25 minutes that morning. Following his call with Mr. Miller,
an honest to God white
inserted
supremacist.
for the first time a line in his speech that said, quote, "And we will see whether Mike Pence enters history as a truly great and courageous leader. All he has to do is refer the illegally submitted electoral votes back to the states that were given false and fraudulent information where they want to recertify." No prior version of this speech had referenced Vice President Pence or his role during the joint session on January 6th. These last-minute edits by President Trump to his speech were part of the president's pressure campaign against his own vice president. But not everyone wanted these lines regarding the vice president included in the president's speech, including White House lawyer Eric Hirschman.
Did you ever speak to anybody in the White House at the time about this disagreement between the president and the vice president, other than the president, based on the objection from your counsel?
This is Steve
Maybe had a brief conversation about it with Eric Hirschman.
Tell me about that. What do you remember him saying to you about this disagreement?
I just remember him saying that that he had a I don't want to get this wrong. Sort of something to the effect of thinking that it would be counterproductive. I think he thought to discuss the matter publicly.
So it came up in the context of editing the president's speech on January the 6th?
It just came up in the conversation where Eric knew it was in the speech, and so he had a sidebar with me about it.
And so the speechwriters took that advice and removed the lines about Vice President Pence. And later that morning at 11:20 a.m., President Trump had a phone call with the vice president. And as the committee detailed in an earlier hearing, that phone call was, by all accounts, tense and heated. During this call, the vice president told the president that he would not attempt to change the outcome of the election. In response, the president called the vice president of the United States and other derogatory words. As you can see in this email, after Vice President Pence told President Trump that he would not unilaterally deliver him a second term in office, The speechwriters were directed to reinsert the Mike Pence lines. Here's how one of the speechwriters described President Trump's last-minute change to the speech.
And as I recall, there was a very tough sentence about the vice president that was added.
I want to hear Hirschman drop some F-bombs.
To attack Vice President Pence in front of a crowd of thousands of angry supporters who had been led to believe the election was stolen. When President Trump arrived at the Ellipse to deliver his speech, he was still worked up from his call with Vice President Pence. And although Ivanka Trump would not say so, her chief of staff gave the committee some insight into the president's frustration.
It's been reported that you ultimately decided to attend the rally because you hoped that you would calm the president and keep the event on an even keel. Is that accurate?
No, I don't know who said that or where that came from.
What did she share with you about why it was concerning that her father was upset or agitated after that call with Vice President Pence in relation to the Ellipse rally? Why did that matter? Why did he have to be calmed down, I should say?
Well, she shared that he had called the vice president a not an expletive word.
Pussy.
I think that bothered her, and I think she could tell based on the conversations and what was going on in the office that he was angry and upset, and people were providing misinformation. And she felt like she might be able to help calm this situation down, at least before he went on to stage.
The president did go on stage, and then he gave the speech that he wanted to give. It included the formal changes he had requested the night before and in that morning, but also many important last-minute ad-lib changes. A single scripted reference in the speech to Mike Pence became 8. A single scripted reference to rallygoers marching to the Capitol became 4, with President Trump ad-libbing that he would be joining the protesters at the Capitol. Added throughout his speech were references to fighting and the need for people to have
courage. He tried to choke a Secret Service agent with his tiny hands to make it happen.
A staff-written script and used only once. Here are some of these ad-lib changes that the president made to his speech.
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. So I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. But we're going to try and give our Republicans, the weak ones, because the strong ones don't need any of our help, we're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country. So let's walk down Pennsylvania Avenue.
White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his deputy did not
testify. We just saw a video of his
about the election were false.
Sitting for a deposition.
In fact, the message that President Trump delivered that day was built on a foundation of lies. He lied to his supporters that the election was stolen. He stoked their anger. He called for them to fight for him. He directed them to the U.S. Capitol. He told them he would join them. And his supporters believed him, and many headed towards the Capitol. As a result, people died. People were injured. Many of his supporters' lives will never be the same. President Trump's former campaign manager, Brad Parscale, recognized the impact of the speech immediately.
Who was a criminal himself.
On January 6th in excerpts from text messages to Katrina Pearson. Mr. Parscale said, quote, "This is about Trump pushing for uncertainty in our country, a sitting president asking for civil war." And then when he said, "This week I feel guilty for helping him win," Katrina Pearson responded, "You did what you felt right at the time, and therefore it was right." Mr. Parscale added, "Yeah, but a woman is dead. And yeah, if I was Trump and I knew my rhetoric killed someone." When Ms. Pearson replied, "It wasn't the rhetoric," Mr. Parscale said, "Katrina, Yes, it was. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back.
Seriously, it was.
We're joined today by Mr. Jason Van Tavenhove and Mr. Stephen Ayers.
Here we go.
Tavenhove is an artist and journalist. He's a former spokesman of the Oath Keepers and a former close associate of Elmer Stewart Rhodes, the founder and president of the Oath Keepers, who has been charged with seditious conspiracy in relation to the Capitol attack.
Sorry, I got you confused with Mr. Rhodes,
with
sir.
the Oath Keepers and has since spoken out forcefully against the violent group. Mr. Ayers is a former supporter.
I would still like to piss in your eye.
He answered the president's call to come to Washington.
It's not as fun if you don't have an open eye hole.
He marched to the Capitol on the president's orders. He pleaded guilty last month to disorderly and disruptive conduct at the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, who no longer supports President Trump, came forward voluntarily to share his story
piss in his eye.
As a warning. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. I recognize myself for questions.
I'm not wanting to talk about people's hairstyles.
Summoned an angry mob of supporters to Washington, D.C., many of whom came prepared to do battle against police and politicians alike. We're fortunate enough to be joined by two witnesses who can help us understand who was in the mob that day. Both hardcore violent extremists like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and average Trump supporters swept up in the fervor of the day. Mr. Van Tatenhove, can you help us understand who the Oath Keepers are?
I can, thank you. My time with the Oath Keepers began back at Bundy Ranch with that first standoff when I went to cover them as an independent
journalist. Right. Sounds about white.
I then subsequently covered two more standoffs, the Sugar Pine Mine standoff and the White Hope Mine standoff. It was at that time that I was offered a job as national media director and an associate editor for the webpage. So I spent a few years with the Oath Keepers, and
clearly,
I can tell you that they
you
may not
can't handle the truth.
A militia, but they are. They're a violent militia, and they are largely Stewart Rhodes. And I think, rather than try to use words, I think the best illustration for what the Oath Keepers are happened January 6th, when we saw that stacked military formation going up the stairs of our Capitol. I saw radicalization that started with my beginning of my time with them and continued over a period of time as the member base and who it was that Stewart Rhodes was courting drifted further and further right into the alt-right world, into white nationalists, and even straight up racists. And it came to a point where I could no
I thought it was
longer
always that. I didn't know it drifted into that.
work for them. But the Oath Keepers are
I thought like it was specifically for that.
Militia that is in large part fed by the ego and drive of Stewart Rhodes, who at times seemed to see himself as this paramilitary leader. I think that drove a lot of it. So, in my opinion, the Oath Keepers are a very dangerous organization.
Well, thank you very much. You've talked a little bit about that danger. So, what is the Oath Keepers' vision for America, and why should Americans be concerned about it?
I think we saw a glimpse of what the vision of the Oath Keepers is on January 6th. It doesn't necessarily include the rule of law. It doesn't necessarily include, it includes violence. It includes trying to get their way through lies, through deceit, through intimidation, and through the perpetration of violence. The swaying of people who may not know better through lies and rhetoric and propaganda that can get swept up in these moments. And I'll admit I was swept up at one point as well too. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, it does, and you talk about being swept up. So at what point did you break with the Oath Keepers?
There came a point, there were many red flags, and I probably should have broke with them much earlier than I did. But the straw that broke the camel's back really came when I walked into a grocery store. We were living up in the very remote town of Eureka, Montana, and there was a group of core members of the group of the Oath Keepers and some associates, and they were having a conversation at that public area where they were talking about how the Holocaust was not real. And that was, for me, something I just could not abide. And, you know, we were not wealthy people at all. We were barely surviving, and it didn't matter. I went home to my wife and my kids, and I told them that I've got to walk away at this point. I don't know how we're going to survive or where we're going to go or what we're going to do, but I just can no longer continue, and put in my resignation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ayers, there were many people in the crowd that day, January 6th, including you, who were not
looking at his hair. It was so nice.
I'd like to start by having you tell the American people a little bit about yourself. Can you tell us about your life before January 6th?
Yeah, basically nothing but a family man and a working man. Worked at the company, a cabinet company up in Northeast Ohio for going on 20 years. You know, family's my life. I was a supervisor there, so that took up a lot of my.
Sir, I am sorry you lived in Northeast Ohio.
Other than that,
I would give you a hug if I could.
Camping, playing basketball, playing games with my son.
Just what any ordinary American citizen, family man would do.
Yep, exactly.
So this committee has reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from January 6th. During this review, we identified you entering the Capitol as we see in this video. Mr. Ayers, why did you decide to come to Washington on January 6th?
For me personally, I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, He basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
So you basically learned about the rally on social media and at some point made a decision to come to Washington.
Yep. I had some friends I found out were coming down, and I just hopped on with them right at the tail end when I found out and came down here with them.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the vice chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any questions she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ayers, when you entered the Capitol last year, did you believe that the election had been stolen?
At that time, yeah. Everything that I was seeing online, I definitely believed that that's exactly what that was the case.
And when you heard from President Trump that the election was stolen, how did that make you feel?
Oh, I was very upset, as were most of his supporters. basically what got me to come down here.
Why, dude? Why were you
Do you
even a
still believe the
supporter?
election was stolen?
Not so much now.
Not so much.
All the social media, when January 6th happened, basically deleted it all. You know, I started doing my own research and everything, and
Oh
for
my God.
For me, for something like that to be that, for that to actually take place, it's too big. You know, there's no way you can keep something like that quiet, as big as something like that.
Yes.
You know, with all the lawsuits being shot down one after another, that was mainly what convinced me.
Well, and I think that's very important. And we've also talked about today and in previous hearings the extent to which the president himself was told that the election hadn't been stolen by his Justice Department, by his White House counsel, by his campaign. Would it have made a difference to you to know that President Trump himself had no evidence of widespread fraud?
Oh, definitely. You know, who knows? I may not have come down here then, you know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, earlier today we showed how Donald Trump's December 19th tweet summoned both extremist groups as well as rank and file supporters of President Trump to come to Washington, D.C., average Americans. He told them to, quote, be there.
What a way to ruin the solstice.
We showed how President Trump repeatedly told them, fight, 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 and they marched to the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, you were in that crowd at the rally, and then the crowd that marched to the Capitol. When you arrived on the ellipse that morning, were you planning on going to the Capitol?
No, we didn't actually plan to go down there. You know, we went basically to see the Stop the Steal rally, and that was it.
So why'd you decide to march to the Capitol?
Well, basically, you know, the president, you know, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
After the president's speech, as you're marching down to the Capitol, how did you feel?
I was, you know, I'm angry, you know, after everything that was basically said in the speech. You know, a lot of the stuff he said, he already put out in tweets. I've already seen it and heard it before. So, I mean, I was already...
Trump knows to play the hits.
So were most of the people there.
So as you started marching, did you think there was still a chance the election would be overturned?
Yeah, at that time I did. You know, because everybody was kind of like in the hope that, you know, Vice President Pence was not going to certify the election. You know, also the whole time on our way down there, we kept hearing about this big reveal I remember us talking about, and we kind of thought maybe that was it. So that hope was there.
Did you think that the president would be marching with you?
Yeah, I think everybody thought he was going to be coming down. You know, he said in his speech, you know,
he tried his best, buddy. He tried his best.
I think I believed it.
I understand.
Tried to choke a Secret Service agent with his tiny little hands.
Capitol area later on. What made you decide to leave?
Basically, when President Trump put his tweet out, we literally left right after that come out.
Wow.
You know, to me, if he would have done that earlier in the day, 1:30, you know, we wouldn't be in this. Maybe we wouldn't be in this bad of a situation or something.
I don't think you would have been in this situation if the cops had bashed your fucking heads in.
Chair recognizes the gentleman.
Just saying.
Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It still boggles my mind to this day.
January 6th,
there wasn't a police force that bashed their fucking heads in. Other than, you know, there's a lot of them that were police that were in the crowd.
Call up militias
there were police
to put down
that were in on it.
Against the United States. And I want to get your thoughts about this in the context of your prior relationship with Stuart Rhodes. I understand that you had conversations.
Executive branch tried to make sure there was as little
Why was he
security
so
as
fixated
possible.
on that? And what did he think it would enable the Oath Keepers to do?
Well, I think it gave him a sense of legitimacy, that it was a path forward to move forward with his goals and agendas. I think we need to quit mincing words and just talk about truths. And what it was going to be was an armed revolution. I mean, people died that day. Law enforcement officers died this day. There was a gallows set up in front of the Capitol. This could have been the spark that started a new civil war, and no one would have won there. That would have been good for no one. He was always looking for ways to legitimize what he was doing, whether by wrapping it in the trappings of it's not a militia, it's a community preparedness team. We're not a militia, we're an educational outreach group. It's a veteran support group. But again, we've got to stop with this dishonesty and the mincing of words and just call things for what they are. You know, he's a militia leader. He had these grand visions of being a paramilitary leader. And
what's Fox News covering right now?
Given him a path forward with that. You know, the fact that the president was communicating, whether directly or indirectly, messaging, you know, kind of that gave him the nod. And all I can do is thank the God.
What he is describing as treason.
Not go any worse that day.
What did the Oath Keepers see in President Trump?
They saw a path forward that would have legitimacy. They saw opportunity, I think, in my opinion, to become a paramilitary force, you know?
Last week, the Department of Justice indicated that it has evidence of the Oath Keepers bringing not just firearms, but explosives to Washington ahead of January 6th. And the committee's also learned that Stuart Rhodes stopped to buy weapons on his way to Washington and shipped roughly $7,000 worth of tactical gear to a January 6th rally planner in Virginia before the attack. Did you ever hear
where was the person asking about the weapons?
Committing violence against elected political leaders?
Yeah, I mean, that went back from the very beginning of my tenure. One of the first assignments that he brought to me, wanting me to do as more of a graphic artist function, was to create a deck of cards. You may remember back to the conflict in the Middle East, where
they had the deck of cards with all the Taliban leaders,
which was a who's who of kind of the key players on the other side that they wanted to take out. And Stuart was very intrigued by that notion and influenced by it, I think. And he wanted me to create a deck of cards that would include different politicians, judges, including up to Hillary Clinton as the Queen of Hearts. This is a project that I refused to do. But from the very start, we saw that. There was always the push for military training, including there were courses in that community.
I don't know why Hillary Clinton upsets them so much, other than the fact that she is a woman.
Mr. Van Tatenhoff, you say in your very thoughtful written testimony that we received today that you fear what the next election cycle will bring. And you also say that we have been exceedingly lucky in that we have not seen more
Reagan-esque politician that has adopted somewhat palatable social
I think as far as the luck goes, we've had the
recent years
ranch on. I mean, being boots on the ground at
same thing can be said about Joe Biden.
Standoffs, and they were standoffs where there were firearms pointed across lines at federal law enforcement agencies. You know, whatever it may be with that particular standoff. But I think we've gotten exceedingly lucky that more bloodshed did not happen because the potential has been there from the start.
Boy, howdy.
And we got very lucky that the loss of life was, and as tragic as it is, that we saw on January 6th, the potential was so much more. Again, all we have to look at is the iconic images of that day with the gallows set up for Mike Pence, for the Vice President of the United States. You know, and I do fear for this next election cycle because who knows what that might bring. If a president that's willing to try to instill and encourage, to whip up a civil war amongst his followers using lies and deceit and snake oil, and regardless of the human impact.
That's been his entire fucking career.
Again, all bets are off at that point. And that's a scary notion. I have 3 daughters. I have a granddaughter. And I fear for the world that they will inherit if we do not start holding these people to account.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr.
Please, please.
Mr. Ayers.
Can we come together as Americans around that?
I first want to ask you about what finally caused you to leave on January the 6th. We know that the medieval-style combat with our police, the occupation of the building, this was going on for several hours until
I take issue with Jamie Raskin's characterization. If it was medieval-style combat,
that included
they would have been on their horses like fucking jousting.
Did you see that, and did that have any effect on what you were doing?
They would be in some sort of formation with a shield and a pole of some sort.
It seemed like it started to disperse, some of the crowd. Obviously,
also like medieval could span a huge range.
But it definitely dispersed a lot of the crowd.
Many hundreds of
did you leave at that point?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we left.
So, in other words, that was the key moment when you decided to leave, when President Trump told people to go home.
Yeah, we left right when that come out.
You were not a member of an organized group like the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, as most of the crowd wasn't. I wonder, on January 6th, was it your view that these far-right groups like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and 3%ers and others were on your side? Did you have any reservations about marching with them and rallying with them?
Well, I definitely didn't have a problem. I was probably
who they are
online myself. I thought, hey, they're on our team, good. That's how I kind of looked at it at the time. I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was a good thing.
I'm interested in hearing about what's happened to you since the events of January 6th. You told the vice chair that you no longer believe Trump's big lie about the election, but that's what brought you originally to Washington. Looking back on it now, how do you reflect on the role that you played in the crowd that day, and what is going on in your life?
Basically, I lost my job. Since this all happened, pretty much sold my house. So everything that happened with the charges, thank God, a lot of them did get dismissed because I was just holding my phone, but at the same time, I was there. It definitely, it changed my life,
I was just holding my phone. I didn't steal a door.
For the better.
I didn't steal anybody's laptop. I did not shit on the walls.
Well, I could say.
President Trump is still promoting.
I just videotaped other people doing it.
About the election. How does that make you feel?
It makes me mad because I was hanging on every word he was saying. Everything he was putting out, I was following it. If I was doing it, hundreds of thousands or millions of other people are doing it, or maybe even still doing it. It's like he just said about that. You got people still following and doing that. Who knows what the next election could come out? They could end up being down the same path we are right now. Just don't know.
Mr. Ayers, I see that your wife has joined you today, and welcome to Washington. We know this has been very difficult on you both and your family. What lessons, finally, do you want the American people to learn from the way you and your family have suffered as a result of these events?
Biggest thing is I consider myself a family man, and I love my country. I don't think any one man is bigger than either one of those. I think that's what needs to be taken.
People. Shaq is
dive into the
He's
politics.
a big man.
And for me, I felt like I had, like horse blinders on. I was locked in the whole time. Biggest thing for me is
that big
blinders
Chinese
off, make sure you
dude.
step back and see what's going on before it's too late.
He's a big guy.
Well, I want to thank you for your testimony and for
what his
hearing
name
both
is.
of you today. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have
They might be wrapping up
for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously
They have another segment, though.
to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When Donald Trump sent out his tweet, he became the first president ever to call for a crowd to descend on the capital city to block the constitutional transfer of power. He set off an explosive chain reaction among his followers, but no one mobilized more quickly than the dangerous extremists that we've looked at today. Seizing upon his invitation to fight, they assembled their followers for an insurrectionary showdown against Congress and the vice president. On January 6th, Trump knew the crowd was angry. He knew the crowd was armed. He sent them to the Capitol anyway. You might imagine that our founders would have been shocked to learn that an American president would one day come to embrace and excuse political violence against our own
they'd be shocked to learn a lot of fucking
send
things.
an armed mob to attack the Capitol to usurp the will of the people. But you know, Mr. Chairman, the founders were pretty wise about certain things. They actually warned everyone.
To be honest with you, they would probably understand the whole Trump ordeal a lot more than they would, like, women voting.
Ambitious politicians would try to mobilize violent mobs to tear down our own institutions in service of their insatiable ambitions. In the very first Federalist paper, Alexander Hamilton observed that history teaches that opportunistic politicians who desire to rule at all costs will begin first as demagogues, pandering to the angry and malignant passions of the crowd, but then end up as
Try explaining Roe v. Wade to a resurrected founding
violent
father.
insurrection to overturn an election is not an abstract thing, as we've heard. Hundreds of people were bloodied, injured, and wounded.
That would blow their fucking minds.
Police officers, some of them sitting in this room today. I want to give you an update on one officer who was badly wounded in the attack and is well known to the members of this committee because he testified before us last year. Sergeant Aquilino Gunnell is an Army veteran who spent a year on active combat duty in the Iraq War and then 16 years on the Capitol Force. Nothing he ever saw in combat in Iraq, he has said, prepared him for the insurrection, where he was savagely beaten, punched, pushed, kicked, shoved, stomped, and sprayed with chemical irritants, along with other officers, by members of a mob carrying hammers, knives, batons, and police shields taken by force, and wielding the American flag against police officers as a dangerous weapon. Last month, on June 28th,
I love that they got beat.
Sergeant Gunnell's team of doctors told him that permanent injuries he has suffered to his left shoulder and right foot now make it impossible for him to continue as a police officer.
I forget what I was going to say.
He must leave policing for good and figure out the rest of his life. Sergeant Gunnell,
I got distracted.
we wish you and your family all the best. We are here for you. We salute you for your valor, your eloquence, and your beautiful commitment to America. I wonder what former President Trump would say to someone like Sergeant Gunnell, who must now go about remaking his life.
Call him a loser.
If he could even understand what motivates a patriot.
We might even hear what Trump has to say about Grinnell.
Trump introduced one commanding image
later on tonight.
American carnage. Although that turn of phrase explained little about our country before he took office, it turned out to be an excellent prophecy of what his rage would come to visit on our people. Mr. Ayers just described how the trust he placed in President Trump as a camp follower
okay,
derailed
just
his
for
life
my
and nearly
entertainment, I
wrecked
want to hear what Trump
his
has to say
reputation
about
and his
Grinnell
and his family.
But like
A few weeks
for
ago, we heard
his
Shay Moss
own
and her mother, Ruby
safety
Freeman,
and the harassment that his
Speaker
family would
Rusty
face,
Bowers
I hope Trump
from
doesn't
Arizona,
mention him.
and Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger described how hate-filled intimidation campaigns by Trump and his followers made them prisoners in their homes and drove their stress and anxiety to soaring new heights when they refused to do Trump's bidding.
Once again, what is in
American
my best
carnage.
interest for content
That's
is
Donald
probably
Trump's
not
true
in the best
legacy.
interest
His desire to overthrow the people's election
of the country
and seize the presidency interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history, nearly toppled the constitutional order, and brutalized hundreds and hundreds of people. The Watergate break-in was like a Cub Scout meeting compared to this assault on our people and our institutions.
Winchy Poo, you were not live last night so that I could rage you.
In our hearing,
I thought we were going to go do a little meltdown Monday, and it didn't happen.
But the crucial thing is the next step. What this committee, what all of us will do to fortify our democracy against coups, political violence.
I saw you guys were live, but I was going live, and I was like, oh, maybe producer Dave.
Unlike Mr. Ayers and Mr. Van
door.
Tatenhove, people who have recovered and evolved from their descent into the hell of fanaticism, Donald Trump has only expanded his big lie to cover January 6th itself.
You just missed
was the real election.
Oh my God, they're trying to do a stop
was
the
the
steal.
real insurrection. He says
you just missed the Proud Boy Oath Keepers.
With hugs.
One was an Oath Keeper, and one was just like a normal guy that
He
got
threatens
swept
to take
in
one of
the
America's
knee.
two major political parties with him down the road to authoritarianism. And it is Abraham Lincoln's party, no less. The political scientists tell us that authoritarian parties have two
This was
essential
really
features
riveting.
in history and around the world. They do not accept the results of democratic elections when they lose, and they embrace political violence as legitimate. And the problem of
It was
incitement
absolutely
to violence
riveting. They're
has
wrapping up
only
now,
grown
though.
more serious in the
But we
internet
get more
age,
on Thursday
as we
night.
have just heard. But this is not the problem of one party. It is the problem of the whole country now. American democracy, Mr. Chairman, is a precious inheritance, something rare in the history of the world.
And streamed at the
even
same
on Earth
time?
today.
Jesus.
Constitutional democracy is the silver frame, as Lincoln put it, upon which the golden apple of freedom rests.
I assume you weren't like on a
We need to
forklift or
defend
anything.
both our
that you were just like in your office.
and our freedom with everything we have, and declare that this American carnage ends here and now. In a world of resurgent authoritarianism and racism and anti-Semitism, let's all hang tough for American democracy.
That makes it a little better.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Murphy, for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At one of our
That the
first
Board of
hearings,
Supervisors
Chairman
are doing
Thompson explained
this,
that the
like,
members of this committee
somebody stole
would
the
not
Board of
spend much time talking
Supervisors?
about ourselves. Rather, we would let the evidence play the leading role. And the chairman was right, because this isn't about promoting ourselves as
a little
individuals.
gnat.
It's about protecting the country we love. And it's about preserving what actually makes America great. The rule of law, free and fair elections, and the peaceful transfer of power from one elected leader to the next. But if I may say a word about myself and why I'm proud to serve on this committee. I'm the only member of this committee who was not blessed to be born an American. I was born in Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and my family and I fled a communist government and were rescued by the US Navy and were given sanctuary in America.
Now we gotta do some commie bashing.
In my gratitude for America's grace and generosity, I love this country. On January 6th, 4 decades after my family fled a place where political power was seized through violence, I was in the United States Capitol, fleeing my fellow Americans. Members of the angry mob had been lied to by a president and the other powerful people who tried to convince them without evidence that the election had been stolen from them. Some of them then tried to use physical violence.
I wonder where they got that idea
free and
from.
fair election. Our committee's overriding objective is to fight
I wonder
fiction
where
with
the
facts,
Shasta County
to create a full account for the
idiots
American
got that
people
idea from.
and for the historical record, to tell the truth of what happened and why it happened, to make recommendations so it never happens again, to defend our democracy. To me, there's nothing more patriotic than that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Is everybody going
Chairman,
to
let me
speak?
put what you have seen today in a broader context. At the very outset of our hearings, we described several elements of President Trump's multi-part plan to overturn the 2020 election.
Are
Our
all of
hearings
you
have now
going to
covered
speak?
all but one of those elements. An organized
Justin,
campaign to persuade
are you
millions of
trolling?
Americans of a falsehood that the 2020 election was stolen by widespread fraud. A corrupt effort to pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count electoral votes. An effort to corrupt the U.S. Department of Justice. Efforts to pressure state election officials and legislators to change state election results. A scheme to create and submit fake electoral slates from multiple states. And today, you saw how President Trump summoned a mob to Washington for January 6th, and then knowing that that mob was armed, directed that mob to the United States Capitol. Every one of these elements of the planning for January 6th is an independently serious matter. They were all ultimately focused on overturning the election, and they all have one other thing in common. Donald Trump participated in each substantially and
Hey, Media Winch, I got another one you're gonna really like.
of those
Up
involved.
yours, woke moralists.
Next
We'll
week,
see
we will
who
return to
cancels
January
who.
6th itself. As we have shown in prior hearings, Donald Trump and his legal team, led by Rudy Giuliani, were working on January 6th to delay or halt Congress's counting of electoral votes. The mob attacking and invading the Capitol on that afternoon of January 6th was achieving that result. And for multiple hours, Donald Trump refused to intervene to stop it. He would not instruct the mob to leave or condemn the violence. He would not order them to evacuate the Capitol and disperse. The many pleas for help from Congress did no good. His staff insisted that President Trump call off the attack. He would not. Here are a few of the many things you will hear next week from Mr. Cipollone.
Well, we're hearing from Cipollone again.
Capitol, is that right?
I was, and others were as well.
Was it necessary for you to continue to push for a statement directing people to leave all the way through that period of time until it was ultimately issued after?
I felt it was my obligation to continue to push for that, and others felt it was their obligation as well.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing room and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement went out? Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, it would have been possible.
And you will hear that Donald Trump never picked up the phone that day to order his administration to help. This is not ambiguous. He did not call the military. His Secretary of Defense received no order. He did not call his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. Mike Pence did all of those things. Donald Trump did not. We will walk through the events of January 6th next week, minute by minute. And one more item. After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back. In my opening, I mentioned how we look to our leaders to serve as a fail-safe if people in this country refuse to accept the results of an election. That's part of the way those in positions of public trust uphold their oath, how they show fidelity to the Constitution. In the run-up to January 6th, Donald Trump had an obligation to tell his supporters to accept the results of the election. Instead, he urged them.
He had an obligation to tell his supporters the fucking truth.
Toward mob violence. The idea of mob violence make me think of another sort of fail-safe. All across this country, there are different ideas about what role the federal government should play in our lives. In fact, up here on this dais, there are plenty of different ideas. But there are moments when the institutions of our federal government are the fail-safe. I am from a part of the country where, had it not been for the federal government and the Constitution, my parents and many more Americans like them would have continued to be treated as second-class citizens. The freedom to be able to vote without harassment, travel in relative safety, and dine and sleep where you choose is because we have a government that looks over the well-being of its citizens. This is especially important in moments of crisis. When we have a natural disaster that state governments can't handle on their own, when there's an emergency that requires action by our public health services or our military, we have a federal
Benny Thompson should cut his parts
happened
down
on January 6,
significantly.
2020 was another one of those moments in history that test the strength of our federal government. January 6th was an attack on our country. It was an attack on our democracy.
Comes off as you grandstanding, it's boring.
A sitting president with a violent mob trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power from one president to another.
These closing statements should have been very
my
brief.
blood boil to think of it. In a moment like that, what would you expect to see?
Preview what's coming up next at the next hearing.
Of the United States sitting behind the
and how it ties into what you did tonight or today.
Assuring the American people that the attack would be repelled and the threat would be dealt with. You'd expect to be reassured that there was a fail-safe. Instead, the
Episode 8 coming at you Thursday night.
He disregarded the advice of the people who had taken an oath to the Constitution. He oversaw.
Which means I don't have to do any news.
Aided by people whose loyalty was only to Donald Trump. There's nothing we can compare that to. There's nothing in our great nation's history.
Well, they keep adding episodes.
Come close to that sort of betrayal and dereliction. Thank goodness our system of government held in spite of a commander-in-chief who worked in opposition to what the Constitution designed. When this committee reconvenes, we'll tell the story of that supreme dereliction by the commander-in-chief, how close we came to a catastrophe for our democracy, and how we remain in serious danger. The chair requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted witnesses and members from the room. Without objection,
I guess that is the true ending.
The House Select Committee investigating the Capitol attack on January 6 has wrapped today's hearing following stark testimony from both the former Oath Keeper spokesman and also a man who broke into the Capitol on January 6th. They linked the rioters' actions with planning from far-right organizations and the former president and his team. Earlier today, we heard testimony about a December 18th Oval Office meeting that one witness described as unhinged. James Homan joins me, Libby Casey, here to talk about what we heard today. Our colleague Rhonda Colvin is in that hearing room and, as asked, is waiting until the witnesses leave to exit and join us. You know, James, we heard Jamie Raskin end his presentation today by talking about the wounds, both seen and unseen,
a harmonica holder,
some fatal, some
pipe.
Permanent, that have been suffered by,
We're coming up with ideas here. We're ideas
President
people.
Trump made and things that he did. Let's reflect on that for a moment.
Yeah, Libby, the committee connected the dots from the violence at the Capitol on January 6th that Officer Gunnell experienced back to Donald Trump himself.
Can I just say, James, I'm sorry, I just noticed that the shot moved away, but we just saw for a moment Stephen Ayers talking to the officers. There he is. So he's talking to Officer Hodges, who we saw, images of him being crushed by the attackers in the Capitol. Stephen Ayers, who's pled guilty to entering the Capitol, he said it wouldn't have gone way worse for him had he, been charged. He was facing more charges, but he was only holding a phone. He is yet to be sentenced. But I just want to acknowledge that moment, because you see there two men who were on the opposite sides of that battle for the Capitol, for American democracy. We now.
Clearly he wanted to do this, so
it's a powerful moment.
He has cooperated.
What Jamie Raskin said a couple minutes ago. He will probably get who we saw testify last summer,
reduced sentence, they get probation, some shit like that.
He's not going to be able to be a police officer.
He seemed harmless.
His left shoulder is so injured from being crushed by the mob in hand-to-hand combat that he said was worse than anything he saw in Iraq. Described it as medieval. He's not going to be able to be a law enforcement officer anymore. And those two people that
look on the bright side.
It does
humanize.
Not
get to be a cop anymore.
Whole tragedy. This wasn't just some constitutional principle, some legal theory. This was a very real flesh and blood fight for the soul of America, and the outcome wasn't necessarily preordained. Going into January 6th. And unlike a lot of things in American history, this is one of those situations that really does seem scarier and worse as more time passes. The more we learn about for example, one of the revelations this afternoon that the Oath Keepers member Kelly Meggs called and spoke to the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, after Trump's tweet on December 19th to talk about coordinating on January 6th. Donald Trump called Stephen Miller at 9:52 a.m. on the morning of January 6th. They talked for 25 minutes, and Trump insisted on adding language pressuring and attacking Mike Pence by name before this mob. You heard Steve Bannon talk to Donald Trump before he went on his podcast to say, this will be wild. It's going to be crazier than anyone knows. Make sure to come on January 6th. You heard Julie Radford, who was Ivanka Trump's chief of staff, saying that Ivanka felt like she had to go to that January 6th rally, the so-called Stop the Steal rally, to calm Trump down. And then you saw the clip of Ivanka Trump saying she didn't recall that before her own chief of staff described it on video. So that's what I mean by connecting the dots. The committee pulled all of this very human drama back to the man who was in the Oval Office and really did summon the mob.
We're looking at images there of Officer Gunnell.
Not the literal mob.
Suit jacket.
I like the Italians.
By other officers. Caroline Edwards, who we heard earlier testify, also Officer Hodges, who we talked about, and then Michael Fanone, who was with the Washington, D.C. Police Department. He has since left that and is a commentator on television. I mean, everyone's lives in these officer pool has been dramatically affected and changed in so many ways. I want to bring Hannah Alam into the conversation, national security reporter who focuses on extremism and domestic terrorism. She joins us from assignment right now in Oklahoma, but she's been covering the hearing today and following it. Hannah, what stood out for you today?
Yeah, hi there.
Hey, what up, Hannah?
There were a number of pretty big sort of political revelations and details we learned about this quote-unquote unhinged meeting in the Oval Office. But because I cover
unhinged indeed,
the part I was listening for, any update on what
Sidney Powell and her chugging of the Dr. Pepper.
New on that front,
that was the moment for me.
The committee did a compelling job in showing the immediacy that a command from Donald Trump had on his most loyal followers, including all sorts of right-wing and far-right extremist groups that were mentioned at the hearing. And as we saw in the various responses that were played from, those extremist influencers, conspiracy theorists, Trump's tweet that January 6th was going to be wild, it wasn't received as, this is a promise of a good time, come on out and rally. I mean, it was received as a call to action and as members of the committee said, a call to arms. And so there were instantly messages that we saw, played at the hearing that were described as openly homicidal. And I guess another thing that stood out and kind of struck me as a bit odd was the calling of the witness, Jason von Tatenhove. He's a former top spokesman of the Oath Keepers. He was a close aide to Stuart Rhodes, the founder, for several years. But he left a long time ago. So he wasn't able to offer insight into any kind of planning or violence around January 6th. But he did say that was the kind of event that this group has long dreamed of, planned for, and trained for. Something that would, maybe trigger a wider extremist revolt one day.
Let's talk more about that testimony from Jason van Tatenhove. You have covered the Oath Keepers. You've interviewed
Van
him.
Tatenhove is a fun
Talk
name.
to us more about how
my
his
name was
testimony
Van
fits into
Tatenhove.
the broader picture of what the committee's trying to show.
Justin Van Tatenhove.
I think he was able to show kind of the historical backdrop to the Oath Keepers that,
I might
they
change my name to Justin Van Tatenhove.
had always had these designs of some kind of big, violent government, anti-government revolution, fancied himself as some sort of paramilitary leader, is what he said. I've interviewed several former Oath Keepers, including Jason van Tatenhove, who said that Rhodes fancied himself as a sort of wannabe George Washington, was one of the descriptions used. And so, they're showing that this is exactly the kind of event that this group had, dreamed of and trained for, and that training looked familiar, the rhetoric was familiar, but he was not able to, testify.
I thought there was some emote going by on the screen, but it was like somebody's boom mic
to show the long
went by, like in the congressional chamber.
Hannah, can you give us a picture of the depth of right-wing extremism in America today? And also, is it increasing or decreasing since January 6th, 2021?
And for a long time, predating the Trump years, right-wing and far-right groups have been pushing into the mainstream. But I think, extremism analysts agree that the Trump presidency really hastened that process and normalized a lot of groups and speech and ideologies that were once solidly, on the fringe. And, I was just interviewing extremism analysts today about talking about the hearings and this wider culture of political violence on the right. And, one of them was telling me that, more precise gerrymandering has created a more extremist electorate and that Republican politicians are now pressured to veer right to stay competitive. And, we've certainly seen this struggle openly within the Republican Party, the extremist fringe, kind of steamrolling moderates, taking aim at so-called rhinos, Republicans in name only, because of these competing visions of what the GOP should be. And certainly the analysts that I'm speaking with and interviewing are very concerned, and I would say nearly all of them predict that we'll see more political violence because of this dangerous mix of what they call, deep polarization, the nasty political rhetoric, the spread of these violent right-wing ideologies into the mainstream, and then the easy availability of guns and other weapons. So quite a concerning time, especially, I guess, heading into the midterms. They've raised that as a potential flashpoint.
Hannah Alam, national security reporter focusing on extremism and domestic terrorism for the Washington Post. Thank you so much, Hannah. Really appreciate you joining us by phone. Let's go to James Hohman. James, it is alarming when you hear analysts and reporters like Hannah reflecting on what they are hearing from experts about extremism. We did hear a warning from the committee today about really where this goes from here.
We're going to be back later on tonight.
The cliffhanger there
with the actual Troll Patrol at its normal time, 8 p.m. If you're watching on Twitch, we're going to go say hey to Hilda Beast.
Tampering and saying that Trump called one of the witnesses that the committee hasn't.
Don't do anything I wouldn't do
last week, and that.
However, that doesn't limit your options very much at all. He or she. We'll see you at 8 p.m. on the Troll Patrol
the committee
live.
And she revealed that the January 6th committee has alerted